bloody streets of the Mafia underworld. And now back to our regularly scheduled program. This is a true story of betrayal, greed, and murder. A look into one of the most violent eras in Mafia history. It's me. Welcome to my channel. It's the 1920s in America. It was once home to many Italian immigrants who came to the United States in the early 20th century, seeking better lives for themselves and their families. Many of these immigrants were poor and working class, and they lived in tenements and other types of low-income housing. There was a saying back then, "Brooklyn ain't big enough for the two of us." That's how bad things were. The most powerful mafia family in Brooklyn was the Lucci Z crime family. They were led by a man named Thomas E. Dewey, and they controlled most of the illegal activities in the city. They had a strong presence in the waterfront, where they ran a major bootlegging operation. The main reason for this was because of the city's large Italian-American population. This gave the Mafia a ready-made base of support and allowed them to operate with relative impunity. In fact, the Italian community in Detroit was so tight-knit that it was practically impossible for outsiders to penetrate. This made it very difficult for the police to gather intelligence on the Mafia and break up their operations. And if you enjoyed this video, please hit the like button and subscribe for more great content. Thanks for watching. Until next time, even if they did manage to get some information. The local Italians were so loyal to the Mafia that they would never cooperate with the authorities. The Detroit Mafia was particularly active in the illegal gambling and liquor businesses. With the rise of organized crime, these businesses became extremely lucrative, and the Mafia made a lot of money off of them. This money was then used to fund other criminal activities such as murder, extortion, and racketeering. The violence was so bad in Detroit that it earned the nickname the Mad Mile. This was the name given to the area around 8 Mile Road where many of the most notorious crimes took place. They also controlled much of the gambling and prostitution in the area. The competition wasn't far behind, though. The Colombo crime family was led by a man named Charles Luciano, and they were based out of Manhattan, but had a strong presence in Brooklyn as well. In fact, in the late 1940s and early 1950s, Philadelphia was the site of one of the most brutal mafia wars in history. The war was between two rival families, the Bonanno crime family and the Lucchese crime family. The violence was so intense that it literally shook the city to its core. Homes were firebombed, people were shot in the street, and entire families were wiped out. Eventually, the FBI got involved, and the violence finally came to an end. But the damage was already done. The Mafia had been severely weakened in Philadelphia, and it would never recover. In fact, today, Philadelphia is considered to be one of the least Mafia-ridden cities in the country. The two families were constantly fighting for control of the streets, and this led to a lot of violence. There was a whole bunch of killings, bombings, and other acts of violence that took place in the streets of Brooklyn during this time period. But eventually the police were able to crack down on the Mafia and break up many of their operations. This led to a decrease in violence in the streets of Brooklyn. But the Mafia would never go away completely, and they would continue to be a problem in the city for decades to come. Despite the poverty, Little Italy was a tight-knit community, and the residents were proud of their Italian heritage. They celebrated their culture through food, music, and art, and they also fought to preserve their way of life in the face of outside pressures. The main reason for this was because of the city's large Italian-American population. This gave the Mafia a ready-made base of support and allowed them to operate with relative impunity. For years, the Chicago outfit, as it was known, was led by a man named Al Capone. He was arguably the most famous gangster of all time, and he used Chicago as his home base to build his criminal empire. Under Capone's leadership, the Chicago outfit became one of the most powerful Mafia organizations in the country. They controlled a vast network of illegal activities that brought in millions of dollars every year. The money was so good that even the police seemed like they didn't want to mess with the Mafia. Of course, this would eventually change, and the Chicago outfit would eventually be broken up. But not before a lot of bloodshed. The gang wars that took place in Chicago during the 1920s and 30s were some of the most violent in the history of the Mafia. Entire families were wiped out, and the streets were often just littered with corpses. Eventually, the police were able to put a stop to the gang wars, and the Chicago outfit was eventually broken up. But the violence left an indelible mark on the city of Chicago. But as the years went by, Little Italy became known as the home of the Mafia. In the 1920s and 30s, the neighborhood was controlled by 5 different crime families, and they ran a wide range of illegal activities from gambling to prostitution to narcotics trafficking. The violence was so bad that it earned Little Italy the nickname Murder, Inc. One of the most famous gangsters to come out of Little Italy was Charles Lucky Luciano. He was born in 1897 to poor Italian immigrants and grew up in a tenement building. As a young man, he got involved with the Mafia and quickly rose to the top. By the time he was in his 30s, he was the boss of one of the 5 crime families in Little Italy and was said to be worth millions of dollars. But despite his wealth and power, Luciano was always looking for more. He wanted to take over the entire Mafia and make himself the most powerful gangster in the world. To do this, he made a deal with the other bosses to set up a meeting in a neutral location. Then he brought bodyguards with him to the meeting and killed all the other bosses, taking over their families and making himself the boss of all the bosses. Luciano then moved to Cuba, where he spent the rest of his life. The Mafia has become a powerful force in the country, with bootlegging, gambling, and prostitution raking in huge profits for these ruthless killers. The Mafia is growing in numbers and wealth. With this newfound power comes new problems. Rivalries between the gangs are becoming more common and bloody. Betrayals and double crossings are at an all-time high. There is a war going on between the police and the Mafia. The Mafia has been trying to get away with their crimes for years, but now the police are closing in on them. This is a time where only the strong will survive. And in this video, we're going to take a look at some of the most brutal and bloody streets in the Mafia underworld. You won't believe what went down right here. Bloody Street 1, Little Italy, Manhattan. Little Italy is a neighborhood in Manhattan, New York City. Bloody Street 2, Brooklyn. The 1930s. Brooklyn was a major hub for the Mafia and was home to many of the biggest gangsters in the country. Bloody Street 3, Chicago. Chicago was another hotbed for Mafia activity during the 1920s and 30s. Bloody Street 4, Detroit. Detroit was another major hub for Mafia activity during the 1920s and 30s. Bloody Street 5, Philadelphia. As the years went by, Philadelphia became less and less of a Mafia town. But that doesn't mean that the violence ended. Which bloody streets surprised you? So there you have it, some of the bloodiest streets in Mafia history. Which one surprised you the most? Let me know in the comments below.